And did you set about, in terms of research, to listen? Was it more the verbal, the sort of auditory incantation? Because, you know, Allen Ginsberg read here at the 92nd Street Y. And I gather there were tapes. We weren't able to access those for tonight. That would have been kind of fun to hear a little snippet of it. But could you talk a little about the kinds of research that you did? Obviously, you had to read the work. Listening, watching, and how much of your own self did you want to bring in? For example, when you do the incantatory poetry, did you do that a number of times in order to get it to be a combination of your voice and Allen Ginsberg's voice?
No, well, so Ginsberg, one of the main things about Ginsberg in this movie is the voice and the reading of the poem. And this, you know, we're depicting the first reading of the poem. So when I'm performing that, you know, I want it to be Ginsberg's voice. And actually, originally, it was going to be Ginsberg's actual voice underneath the animation sequences. Because this project began as a documentary. Rob and Jeffrey were approached by the Ginsberg estate to make a documentary to honor the 50th anniversary of the poem. And they missed that deadline. It took them 7 years to develop this thing. But what they found was that there was no film of Ginsberg from this time. The closest that they could find is, you know, Robert Frank's film "Pull My Daisy," which is a couple years after this period. And so the best that they would have if they made that documentary would be, you know, wonderful people like, you know, Ferlinghetti, looking back to 50 years earlier and recounting these stories. And, you know, Jerry Aronson had already made a documentary about Ginsberg that covered kind of this territory in that way. And it was a very good documentary. So they thought, we want to be able to access the young Allen. And really the only way to do that is to get an actor. But there are still things about the project and the script that retained the kind of the soul of the documentary. You know, the fact that all the court scenes are based on transcripts. I just had a class this semester about the beats, and we read the court transcripts. I was looking and I was like, wow, this is our script for the movie. So, like literally, it's rearranged a little bit, but it's everything everyone said, and also everything that I say as Ginsberg in those interviews are based on interviews that Allen gave. And so when we got to the readings, I felt like, no, this needs to be Allen's voice. The thing is, Allen, you know, Allen read that poem throughout his entire life. I'm sure probably up until the year that he passed away. And there are many recordings of Allen over the course of his life doing that poem. And frankly, he became a better reader of his work as he got older. And there is no recording of the Sixth Gallery reading, the first public reading, but there are recordings that were made soon after that. And compared to, you know, later in life, the early recordings are very kind of monotone, and it's like it seems like he's taking himself very seriously in those readings. There's this album called it's like Holy Soul Jelly Roll, I think, and it's just recordings of Ginsberg readings. And there's a very early reading on there, and people and you can hear the audience, and you can tell that they've all been drinking and they're having fun, and there's some, you know, kind-hearted hecklers, but, you know, just people making some comments while he's reading, and it doesn't go along with them as I imagine he would later in life. He kind of is like, all right, I don't, you know, cut out the heckling, you know, and all that. And so I thought, well, and I discussed this with Rob and Jeffrey, like, if we do the first public reading, he was probably really nervous, or he was doing this kind of monotone thing. But that won't tell our story in the best way. And so what we ended up doing was putting together a combination of different readings that he gave so that you could feel the arc of Ginsberg's entire career over the course of that reading. And you won't necessarily know, but you can, in the beginning, he's a little tentative and more serious. And then when he gets to more expressive parts or parts of the poem that are addressing people that were actually in the audience, like Kerouac or Cassidy, he'll, get more expressive. And in that way, you can feel kind of the way Allen read the poem over his whole life, rather than just the serious, slightly insecure young budding poet.
And for the film, did you at any point read the entire poem out loud in one take, or was it always filmed in segments?
Yes, I read the poem in its entirety many times, a few times in different situations when they recorded it. I read it to myself in its entirety. I don't know how many times. I'd have these. Fortunately, it comes in a very small volume, so I could walk around New York and just read that out loud. And I did that. I mean, it took them a while to put this movie together, so I had a full year from when I signed on to when we started filming. So, especially in the last 3 months, before we started shooting, I would just take that wherever I went and read it out, and also listen to him and read it with him. And